The receptionist's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Company policy. No children on the floor." Maya shifted her sleeping 5-year-old the plastic envelope with her resume sweating in her hand. 2 jeepneys, 1 train, rent due in 5 days. "We can reschedule," felt like a joke with teeth. Then the elevator opened. A man in a suit paused, listening. Everything okay? 10 minutes later, the interview was moved to a café, a hot chocolate giving her son a foam mustache while Maya quietly redesigned how a company listens. One question remains. What happens when policy meets a mother who cannot afford next week? At sunrise, the city was still humming with last night's neon. Jeepneys rattled past puddles the color of mercury. Street vendors rolled up tarps like they were folding away the night, and Maya pressed a kiss to her son's forehead as he dozed on the LRT seat, his head against her arm, his breath warm in the crook of her elbow. Her resume sat in a plastic envelope on her lap as if it were something fragile, an heirloom that might splinter if she breathed too hard. By the time the train squealed into Ayala, the sky had moved from pale bruised violet to a steady manila blue that promised heat. By mid-morning, she tugged the envelope free, checked the time on her phone, and thought, "We can make it." She had triple-checked the address the night before, above a coffee shop in Bonifacio Global City, with glass walls and potted fiddle-leaf figs and baristas who smiled with their whole faces. Up the elevators to the 32nd floor, a white lobby with concrete floors polished to a sheen, and, beyond the glass, desks arranged in precise lines like musical measures, each one with a laptop dock and a plant in an earthen pot. The company was called Halo, a late-stage fintech darling that handled micro-lending for small vendors, trying to rewrite how capital flowed in a country where the distance between asking for help and getting it was often measured in shame. Halo's name had hovered in the corner of Maya's dreams for weeks. She could see it when she closed her eyes, white letters in a ring of light, and behind them, the promise of a life that didn't mean rehearsing prices at the market before she went, so she wouldn't feel poor when she handed a crumpled bill to the vendor. When the doors slid open, cold air licked her ankles, and the scent of vanilla and toner hit her nose. A receptionist in a navy blazer lifted an eyebrow as Maya stepped out, carrying her son Rafa, who'd stirred as the elevator shuddered. He was 5, limp with sleep, his blue dinosaur backpack bumping against her hip. "Good morning," Maya said. The receptionist's smile was soft and rehearsed. "Hi, which team are you meeting?" "Product operations, 10 o'clock interview with a Miss Santos." Maya shifted Rafa higher on her hip and smoothed his hair. He was awake now, turning his head to see the sheer curtain of the skyline, helicopters floating at a distance like silver insects. The receptionist tapped a keyboard. "Name?" "Maya Ledesma." "Miss Ledesma, yes. You'll need a visitor badge." The receptionist's eyes flicked from Maya to Rafa. "And this is—" "My son Raphael. He'll sit quietly," Maya said, her voice quickening at the end. They had rehearsed this too. Rafa had nodded solemnly over the cracked plastic of their dining table, the ceiling fan clicking softly above them. "I'll be quiet like a mouse, promise. I'll draw dinosaurs." Maya had promised too. "If we get this job, we'll buy bakery bread with real butter on weekends, and you can take swimming lessons." "Company policy is no children on the floor," the receptionist said, trying to pull the words through a smile that had become near transparent. "I'm so sorry." "My babysitter was admitted to the ER last night," Maya said. Her throat felt tight, a garden hose bent into a kink. "We tried to find someone else. I can't miss this." The receptionist bit her lip, then lifted her phone. "Let me check with HR." Maya stood very still. The air smelled like money, or what she thought money must smell like. Citrus, fabric softener, lilies with some of the petals just starting to curl. Rafa wiggled down to stand on his own, and she took his hand. He looked up at the ceiling, at a light fixture that was a ring within a ring, glowing like a galaxy. "Hi, Miss Santos," the receptionist said into the receiver. Your 10 o'clock is here, Miss Ledesma. She has a child with her. A pause. The receptionist's face did something small and apologetic. She says her babysitter's in the hospital. Should I? Okay. She hung up. I'm sorry, she said again, but her voice had lost its soft edges. Miss Santos says we can't proceed with the interview if you have a minor with you. Maya felt the words as a coldness that started at her scalp and traveled down her neck. We took 2 jeepneys and the train, she heard herself say, as if distance were a credential. I'm early. I can step outside if needed. He'll be quiet. He'll sit. She pulled a battered drawing pad from her tote and held it up like a talisman. He brought his dinosaurs. I understand, the receptionist said, though the words had the feel of paper. But it's a safety issue, also a policy thing. We can reschedule. The elevator pinged, and a man stepped out in a suit that looked like it would never wrinkle, with shoes that had a quiet authority, like they knew where they belonged. He smiled at the receptionist, nodded at a passing engineer in a hoodie, then glanced at Maya and Rafa with the kind of quick kindness busy people often mistake for politeness. Sir, the receptionist said, straightening, good morning. He lifted a hand in greeting. Morning, Arlene. He turned back, as if catching something in the air that he almost didn't hear. Everything okay? We're good, Arlene said too quickly. Rafa tugged at Maya's hand. Mama, he whispered, pointing one small finger at a wall lined with framed photographs. Sorry store owners with their hands on their hips, pride shining from their faces. A fish vendor laughing behind the counter of glittering milkfish. A woman in a red shirt holding up a bag of rice like a trophy. Beside each photo, a short paragraph. A micro loan from Halo. Let me buy a second-hand freezer. Now I sell more ice cream and can keep my shop open longer. The words blurred. Miss Ledesma, I can email you to reschedule, Arlene said. We have slots next week. Would that work? Next week, Maya repeated, tasting the strange flatness of it. Rent was due in 5 days. Rafa's school shoes had a seam that was starting to widen like an open mouth. She had prepaid data on her phone for 2 days. Next week had the texture of a joke she wasn't in on. The man still stood close enough to hear the shape of their conversation, if not the words. He had an expression that made it easy to see him at a birthday party, telling a story a little too loudly, or leaning across a table to catch someone's question. He didn't move, and Maya found herself lifting her face to say something like, please or excuse us, or sorry for blocking the view of the skyline with our small, inconvenient lives. Everything okay? He asked again, but this time to Maya. She swallowed. I have an interview at 10, she said. I know there's a policy. I brought my son because my sitter... A breath. This is the only slot I could get. I can sit somewhere quiet. I can... Company policy is no minors on the floor, Arlene said, words clicking forward like beads on an abacus. She pushed a neat stack of visitor badges an inch to the left, as if rearranging plastic rectangles might reorganize reality. The man looked at Rafa. What's your name? Rafa stared up. He had jam on his sleeve, a small galaxy of darker blue where he'd dripped Tahoe on the way here. Rafa, he said. I'm Adrian, the man said, crouching to Rafa's height. Those dinosaurs in your bag? Big fans of interviews, I hear, especially interviews about helping sorry store owners. You know what those are? Rafa nodded with gravity. Where we buy Coke Sacto. Exactly. The man glanced at Maya. Let's go to the coffee shop downstairs. Maya blinked. The interview is... Come on, he said, standing and offering a hand, not in command, but in invitation. We'll bring it to you. Arlene shot to her feet. Sir, we can't... Miss Santos said... It's okay, he said gently, and Arlene sat down, as if her spine had lowered a weight. Tell Miss Santos to bring her team to the café. I'll take this one outside for 10 minutes, so we aren't breaking any rules. The elevator doors slid closed behind them, and the sound was the soft thunk of a page turning. Maya held Rafa's hand tighter. The man's presence was strange in its ease. People that sure of their path usually left a wake of apology behind them. But he moved like someone who had pushed 1,000 doors open for other people and had learned that they could swing easily if you put your hand in the right place. "Thank you," she said when they stepped into the café, the smell of espresso rising like a promise. He shook his head. "No problem." He ordered 2 hot chocolates and an Americano without looking at the menu, like he'd done it 100 times. The barista winked at him. The coffee machine hissed and steamed. He took the drinks, and they sat at a small round table near the window where the sun burnished the edges of the city buildings to gold. "You didn't have to," Maya said, because gratitude felt too small a boat to carry the rest of what she owed. "I did," he said. "I'm Adrian." He extended his hand. She shook it. "Maya." He tapped the table twice, a habit that felt like sealing a pact. "Tell me about you, Maya." She looked down at the smooth tabletop. "I studied computer science, I. "Ice," she said. "UP Diliman. I took leave after I had Rafa. I do freelance QA now. I maintain a set of test scripts for a small accounting startup. But Halo." She stopped, felt at the shape of the sentence like something heavy she had to push. "Halo is doing the thing I believed software could do when I first learned to code. My grandmother kept a ledger of debts in a blue notebook. People wrote their names in it with hands that shook. I used to add the numbers for her with a pencil, tapping next to each figure. I remember thinking, there must be a way to make this less painful. So I started copying phone numbers from the back pages of the notebook into my second-hand Nokia. Because I thought even that small thing, someone reminding them gently." She looked up. "I think about systems all the time. How to make the right thing the easy thing." He sipped his coffee. "And today?" "Today I brought my son to an interview because there's no one else," she said, and to her own surprise, her voice did not tremble. Rafa was drinking his hot chocolate, pressing his upper lip into the foam so he looked like he had a white mustache. He was drawing an apatosaurus in his notebook, with a blue pencil stub, tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth. The cafe door tinkled. A woman in a crisp blouse and black slacks hurried in, flanked by 2 others, a guy in a checked shirt with a tablet tucked under his arm, and a younger woman with a pen behind her ear. The woman in the blouse scanned the cafe, found Maya, then found Adrian, and her posture rearranged itself mid-stride like someone holding hot soup who realized she had to bow. "Sir," she said, "we got your message." Adrian set down his cup and stood. "This is Maya Ledesma," he said. 10 o'clock with product ops. We'll do the interview here." The woman nodded, smile tight. "Of course." She turned to Maya with a look she might have reserved for a slightly late courier. "Miss Ledesma, I'm Laura Santos. This is Carlo. That's Annika. Let's get started." They pulled chairs around the tiny table like a committee meeting in a children's playhouse. Laura opened a folder, but didn't look at it. "We appreciate your interest," she said, eyes flicking to Rafa, who was still drawing. "We need someone with end-to-end process adaptability. We track operational metrics on 3 horizons, and we're launching a new loan product in 2 quarters. How would you build a feedback loop between field data and engineering without slowing our sprint velocity?" Maya felt herself straighten. The question was a rope thrown across a chasm, and she trusted her hands. "You're measuring the wrong thing if you think it slows your sprint velocity," she said. "You want sprint efficacy. You want to catch misalignment at day 3, not week 6. You set up a lightweight observational schema in the app itself. Not stars or smiley faces, those skew. You log a event. 1 tap. Optional voice note. Your field agents can hit it when something makes them go, Then you attach that to session metadata so it's not more work. You make it safe to tap. No punitive reporting." Carlo leaned forward. "We've tried something like that. Engineers screamed about noise. Noise happens when the people who press don't see that it leads to change," Maya said. "You label each with a tag that emerges from clustering the voice notes. You have a rotating engineer from the sprint team and an ops person triage the clusters 3 times per week. When becomes affix, the app pushes a message to the agent who logged it. You helped us ship X. That's your signal-to-noise ratio stabilizer. And if engineers complain, Remind them that debugging is how they love us back." Annika smiled despite herself. "Debugging is how they love us back," she repeated softly. "And the data model?" Laura asked. "We have 9,000 agents in the field across Luzon. We can't blow up our data costs." "You don't," Maya said. "You store as lightweight integers referencing a lookup table for tags with optional compressed audio stored in cold storage after 10 days. You analyze clusters weekly and purge the raw voice after 90 days unless it's tied to an incident. The point isn't to hoard, it's to move information through the system while it's still warm." Adrian leaned back, eyes on Maya. Laura nodded without softness this time. "Okay," she said. "What do you do when an agent submits because a borrower is crying? I can't pay because my husband left. That kind of thing. It's not a bug. It's the world." "You record that too," Maya said. "But you know it's a human flag. On the next release you test a script that routes those tags to a human with training in de-escalation and empathy, and you measure loan persistence. Halo is a product, but it's also a conversation between two people who want a better life." The café had shifted around them. The hiss of the machine had become background, the hum of voices, a band of color that underlined their words. Rafa's pencil scratched softly. He held up his drawing then, the apatosaurus long and low, with a speech bubble over its head that said, "Shim?" Adrian laughed, short and delighted. "That's market research," he said. "We should pay him." The interview washed over the next 40 minutes, every question a new room Maya had to enter and light with words. Laura asked about failure. Carlo asked about cost controls. Annika asked about culture, and Maya told them about the time she'd left Rafa with her neighbor and taken a bus to a client in Muntinlupa, only to realize the client had canceled by email 10 minutes after she left home because his own child had a fever. "I told him it was okay," she said, "but what I meant was, this is the point. We live in a world where cancellations collide with survival. If our company can't bend toward that, then we are building the wrong thing." Laura closed her folder. "Thank you," she said. "We'll be in touch." She stood. Carlo stood. Annika slid a business card across the table and, when she thought no one was looking, flicked her eyes toward Adrian with something like plea and warning. Adrian stood last, as if he didn't want to break the circle too soon. He held out a hand to Maya, and when she took it, he squeezed once. "Great conversation," he said. "Thank you," she said, because what else was there? They left, the bell tinkling again, words like "be in touch" and "thank you" falling to the floor and breaking into quiet. For a moment, Maya let herself exhale. The air was warm against her teeth. She rested her forehead against the cool window, the city's cable of roads spooling below. She hadn't said one thing she wanted to say. She had said everything she could. "Do we have the job?" Rafa asked in a stage whisper. "I don't know," she said, and tried to smile. Adrian was watching her. He seemed about to say something and then didn't, as if the words he was going to say had turned into a bird in his throat, and he was waiting for it to choose a direction. "Do you have a minute?" he asked finally. "Yes," she said, although what she had was a lifetime. He looked at Rafa. "Rafa, do you want to see something cool?" Rafa nodded. Adrian led them back to the elevator, back up the 32 floors, but this time, when the door slid open, the receptionist stood, eyes wide, and said, "Sir," with a breath that had more syllables than the word should have. They stepped past her, past the ringed lights and the photos of shopkeepers, and straight toward a glass corner office with the blinds half drawn. Adrian tapped the door frame with the back of his knuckles. "Come in," he said. Inside was a desk that looked like an ice floe, 2 chairs, a couch with pillows in colors that felt like the sea, a whiteboard with the Sharpie hieroglyphs on it, loops and lines and arrows like a choreography for a dance the rest of the company would learn next sprint. On the wall hung a framed photo Maya recognized from a magazine article she'd read last month while Rafa napped on her lap. A group of engineers in front of a food truck in Cavite. At the center of the photo was a man with a cap on backward, his hand lifted in a peace sign. On the glass wall next to the desk, with a dry erase marker half uncapped, someone had written "Halo is where the heart stops." Adrian lifted the marker and put it down again. "I'm Adrian Lorenzo," he said, a small smile like a door cracked open. "I founded Halo. I don't like to do the thing where I walk through the lobby and people sit up straighter, but sometimes it helps to open doors." Maya's mouth went dry. She thought of the magazine article, how Adrian had grown up in a house with 14 people and 4 fans, how his mother had sold longanisa from their front window, how he'd built Halo after watching a neighbor lose a store over a debt that had gotten a little bigger than his hand could hold. She thought of the comments under the story. "Must be nice to be a genius. How much is he paying himself? Wish he would pay my loans." Another tech bro in a suit pretending to be a saint. She thought of how she had reached to close the article, the phone warm in her palm, thinking not genius or saint, but he looks like someone who remembers the heat. "I'm sorry about Laura," he said. "About the lobby. About the way policy can make us smaller if we're not careful." "You don't have to apologize," Maya said, because the words felt like rain on sun-warmed concrete, and she didn't know what else to tell the sky. "I know," he said, and then, "We've grown fast. That means some of our instincts calcified into rules. We are supposed to be building ladders, not gates." He sat, leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I don't hire alone anymore. Everyone knows that's how founders build churches to themselves. But I do have a rule. When the world shows me a crack in what we've built, and I can repair it with both hands, I try to do it immediately." He picked up the phone. "Can you send Laura back in?" he said into it. "And Carlo, and also legal." Maya stood with her hands wrapped around the strap of her tote so tightly her fingers ached. Rafa had wandered to the window and was pressing his nose to the glass, leaving a small fogged circle on it like a moon. The city spread below him, a collection of stories in school bus yellow and heat haze blue. He was quiet in the way children are quiet when they sense the world has shifted under their feet. Laura knocked and entered with the caution of someone who had climbed into a moving car. Carlo followed, eyebrows a line of concern. A third person came in, a man with thin glasses and a notebook. "Legal?" he said by way of introduction, smiling with more nerves than teeth. "Close the door," Adrian said. "We need to fix something." What happened next would be told later as if it had been inevitable, as if the CEO had always meant to walk into the lobby that minute, as if the receptionist had always practiced a speech she would never have to give again, as if policy were a weather pattern you could map. But sitting there, Maya watched the specific mechanics of change, a man with power choosing to spend it with absolute precision. "We don't allow children on the floor," Laura began. "That rule exists for liability," legal said, "and for focus. Anyone slipping could—" "We will keep the safety reasoning," Adrian said, "but we will add a clause. Interviews can happen off-floor at the café or in a designated ground-floor room if and when a candidate needs accommodation. Our policy will not gate access. It will make space. It will name the world. If we do this right, we'll get better people, not worse outcomes." Laura opened her mouth and then closed it. Her hand hovered above her folder. "I was trying to apply the rule consistently," she said softly now, not a defense, almost an apology. "And you did," Adrian said, his voice kind, "which allowed me to see where it broke. That's a good system. We'll move quickly to adjust." He glanced at legal. "Draft language today. Publish it by end of day with guidance for reception and HR." Legal nodded, scribbling. Adrian turned to Maya. "Do you have 20 more minutes?" "Yes," she said, and then, because she felt like someone should be keeping the world honest, "I had more than 20 before, too." He smiled at that. "Let's finish your interview. Rafa can draw on the couch. I'll sit in if Laura doesn't mind, but only to listen. You're her hire." Laura's mouth twitched. "Yes, sir," she said. "Anika will want to weigh in." They ran through a scenario, an agent's phone battery dying in the field, the downstream effect on loan dispersal, the failure cascade that meant a borrower would have to travel back to the office using fare they didn't have. Maya had ideas about power banks and battery health telemetry and conservative mode fallback. She talked about designing failure pathways not as punishment, but as soft landing. She laughed once, unexpectedly, at her own metaphor about umbrellas that didn't open in the rain, and everyone else laughed, and after that the room felt warmer. When they were done, Laura sat very still. Carlo watched her, pen tapping a slow rhythm against his knee. "I'm hiring you," Laura said finally, "if you'll accept. Associate Manager for Product Operations, probationary for 3 months, 30% above your current freelancing income, plus health benefits. We will also give you a transport allowance for early or late shifts, which you will have from time to time. The offer letter will come by this afternoon." Maya's throat closed. She put a hand on the back of the chair to steady herself. Rafa looked up at her, eyes wide, as if he had just realized her face had changed shape. "Do we get swimming lessons?" he asked. "Yes," she said, but the word felt too thin. She wanted to say yes to 1,000 other things that had nothing to do with water. "Before we finish," Adrian said, "I want to do one more thing." He looked at Laura. "Give Maya the authority of the he said. Laura blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You told her debugging is how engineers love us back," he said. "Let's take that seriously. Make her the primary owner of the pipeline for 90 days. She'll design it with your team. She'll have authority to escalate to me when policy conflicts with purpose." Laura nodded slowly. "Done." "And another thing," he added, turning to the glass wall where Halo is, where the hard stops had been written. He uncapped the marker and wrote underneath, "And where ordinary people are allowed to be whole." He stepped back. "That's for me," he said, "so I remember." They walked out of the office into a floor that looked different to Maya, as if the walls had been repainted while they were talking, not with color, but with permission. At the café, Arlene looked up and saw Rafa's chocolate mustache and Maya's face, and she smiled, a real one this time, full-bodied and a little relieved. "Congratulations," she said without having heard the words. On the commute home, the train was thick with bodies and groceries, and the sound of a radio tinny through someone's backpack. Maya held the overhead strap with one hand and Rafa's backpack with the other. Adrenaline had receded. What remained was a huge, quiet lake inside her chest. When she got off at their stop, the sky had clouded into a metallic sheet, and the air held the promise of rain. By the time they reached their apartment, a neat box with a calendar on the fridge and a jar of coins in which the 20-peso pieces made a more satisfying sound than the 5s. The first drops had started to tick the window like a code. She stood in the center of the kitchenette and looked at the red-tiled floor and the battered pot on the stove and thought, "We're different now, and nothing is different at all." She called her mother. She called her neighbor to tell her she could rest, that Rafa would be with Maya more, not less, because they'd have predictability now. She texted a photo of Rafa's drawing to Adrian because his number had appeared in her messages from the HR group chat, and she added a note. "This is your first submission." He replied with a dinosaur emoji and approved. That night she lay in bed while the rain made a soft drum of the corrugated roof above their window. Rafa slept with one arm thrown across his face. She thought of policy and kindness, of speed and its costs. She thought of goodness the way you think of a meal you are going to cook, with a list and a set of tasks and the hope that you can feed more people than just yourself. The next weeks were a rush of new keys and new logins, of onboarding sessions that felt like trying to drink from a hose, of learning the names of people whose Slack avatars were cats and anime faces and babies wearing sunglasses. Maya learned which conference rooms had the wobbly chairs and which had the whiteboard markers that still worked. She learned that Laura's smile was not a shield but a bridge, that Carlo worried deeply about time and hid it in jokes, that Anika had a laugh like a bell and cried once in the bathroom after a borrower sent a voice note of thanks that came through tinny and bent, like a song on a radio in another room. The pipeline went live after 3 sprints. It was inelegant at first, like any new language. Agents pressed it for everything: when phones lagged, when the app misrendered in low light, when a borrower looked sad. Maya sat with an engineer named Zach every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9 a.m., and they listened to a handful of voice notes while sipping coffee from paper cups that left a faint wet ring on the conference table. They laughed at the ones where someone had pressed by accident and recorded 9 seconds of motorcycle. They cataloged the real ones, the ones that felt like fibers in a rope they were slowly braiding. Too much English on screen 3. Borrowers can't find the button for deferral because it looks like a brand logo. Someone asked if Halo charged interest during typhoons because they were afraid to ask out loud. They fixed small things quickly. They set up experiments for the big things. They sent messages back to the agents. You helped us move the deferral button. You helped us add a line that says, "No interest during declared calamities." They bought 5 more whiteboards. The office air smelled like marker and ideas, and lunch reheated in microwaves where the smell of garlic clung to everything like a blessing. On a Friday 3 weeks in, the floor buzzed with a different kind of energy, the kind that lifts people half an inch from their chairs. A wire story had run about Halo's newest funding round, another 8-figure injection that meant more jobs and more pressure. The comments were the same as always. The team used to ignore them. Maya didn't. She read them the way a gardener studies the soil, with humility. In between the snark were small, soft bulbs of truth. I tried to get a loan and the app crashed. My kuya doesn't understand the English words. If Halo's so kind, why did they call my neighbor when she was late and use a voice that sounded like a cop? She brought the comments to Laura. Laura brought them to Adrian. Adrian wrote them on the glass in fat purple letters. Crash English, voice. He wrote beneath them, fix, soften, human. The new policy on interviews went live that same week. Arlene had a laminated index card under her keyboard with a flowchart. No minors on floor, candidate requests accommodation, book café or ground floor room, inform HR proceed. 2 times in the first month, a candidate asked for accommodation. Both times, by its end, a hiring manager had said, "We should have done this years ago." Adrian sent Arlene flowers that looked like small suns, and a note Maya saw when she stopped by the desk to return a badge someone had left in a conference room. "Thanks for being the first face people see. You opened this door." Arlene tucked the card behind her family photo, and that afternoon she did not correct anyone's handwriting when she checked in packages, which was how Maya knew something had softened. One afternoon, after 2 meetings back-to-back and a spreadsheet that kept trying to erase her formulas, as if the cells had some internal resistance to the shape of the solution she wanted, Maya took a break and walked to the founder's office. The blinds were up. Adrian was at the whiteboard with a marker in his mouth, adjusting an arrow between 2 boxes that said trust and time. He caught sight of her and raised his eyebrows in question. "Got a minute?" she asked. He pulled the marker from his mouth and capped it. "Always." She told him about an agent in Cagayan who had started submitting every day, not about bugs, but about borrowers crying during visits because rice had doubled and they didn't know who to ask for help. She told him she didn't want to turn Halo into a care hotline, but that doing nothing felt like leaving a door closed when you knew there were people on the other side knocking with their softest hands because they didn't want to seem like trouble. "What if we tested a partnership with a community org?" she said. "When the is tagged human, we offer a list of 3 orgs in that agent's area. 1 for food, 1 for legal advice, 1 for childcare. We don't own the problem, we invite help into the room." Adrian looked at the words trust and time and then at Maya. "Will you design it?" he asked. "Yes," she said, and then, because she was still learning how to receive, "if that's okay." He laughed. "You have authority of the You tell me." She designed it. They tested it in 2 districts, and the effect was immediate and unglamorous. Less crying, more checkout completions. Fewer sorry Poe voice notes that sounded like the person on the other end was trying to melt into the air. The orgs sent Halo a thank you message that was mostly emojis. The agent started saying a sentence that Maya underlined in her notebook. "We are not alone." She wrote it on a sticky note and pressed it to her screen. The glue lost stick after a week and fell to the floor like a tiny yellow flag. She put it back up and taped it this time. At home, life did not become a painting where all the corners were straight and the light came from the left. It became simply a life with enough. Enough rice, enough sleep, enough time on Sundays when they sat in the shade of a tree in Rizal Park and Rafa pointed out every kite in the sky as if naming them kept them aloft. They bought butter that came in a foil-wrapped block that made a satisfying crinkle when she peeled it. Rafa took swimming lessons at a pool where the water looked chlorinated to the exact shade of a summer sky, and on the second lesson he put his face in it. He came up gasping, hair slicked, and yelled, "I am brave!" And the instructor laughed and said, "Correct." Maya wrote the word brave on the calendar on their fridge on the day he did that, like it was a holiday. She circled it in red. She wrote on other days, first unaccompanied reading, favorite dinosaur currently, Ankylosaurus, rain, payday heat wave, typhoon warning, charge power bank. Life took on a shape that could be read back later like a map. She sometimes put a line through a thing, not because it was done, but because she needed the past to feel like a road she had actually walked, not like something that had simply happened to her. On a Wednesday 2 months in, a borrower came into the office with a basket of pan de sal still warm from an oven somewhere in Mandaluyong. She asked for Maya by name. "You told the app to make the button bigger," she said, weeping already. "I was able to defer a week when my daughter got sick. They didn't shout. They said I could breathe. I could buy her medicine. Here." She pushed the basket into Maya's hands. "Bread. Eat, please." Maya carried the basket into Laura's area and set it on the table like an altar. Everyone tore a piece, and they ate, and for a moment the office smelled like the exact middle of morning. Adrian wandered by, breaking his own piece and popping it into his mouth. "I love working at a bread company," he said, and no one corrected him. The man who had stopped them at the lobby that first day, the one who had been polite before he knew who Adrian was, came by her desk that afternoon and said, "Hey," and then, not quite looking at her, "Sorry again." He didn't owe her an apology. She took it anyway and gave him back a smile that said, "We're learning together." He showed her pictures of his son on his phone, a series of small faces that had more expression in each frame than some adults did in a week. When her probationary period ended, Laura brought a small paper crown to the stand-up meeting, the kind you get at cheap birthday parties, and placed it on Maya's head. "Permanent," she said, the word like a small bell. "Also," she added, "authority of the renewed, with a team." She gestured to 3 employees behind her, Zach, of course, and Annika, and a new hire named Karina, whose Slack status was always charging. They took a bow. The crown slid down over Maya's eyes, and she pushed it back with both hands like she was drinking something and didn't want to spill. The next quarter, a journalist came to do a profile on Halo for an international magazine. She was sharp, with eyes that missed nothing, and she asked questions that were like stepping on stones in a river. You could lose your balance if you didn't look. She asked to speak to the person who had designed the system, and Maya said yes, but not until after lunch because she had a call with a small team in Ilocos that had found a bug in the audio compression that made all the borrowers sound like robots. The journalist waited. When she finally spoke to Maya, she asked, "Is the CEO as kind as he seems?" Maya thought about the day in the café, about the marker writing on glass, about the flowers at reception, about the way Adrian's eyes sometimes went to the window during stand-ups when someone said something that broke his heart a little, like he was checking that the world outside was still there. "He uses his power like he owes rent for it," she said, "and he always pays on time." The article called Halo an Empathy Engine, which made the engineers groan and the designers blush, and the finance team build a presentation slide with the words in a big font and a chart next to it that showed what happened when you added fuel. Funding calls changed flavor slightly. Agents started calling them Button the Maya, which embarrassed her and delighted the part of her that still needed proof that she had built something no one could strip from her. Someone put a note on the glass wall next to Halo is where the hard stops, also where the becomes a yes. On a hot afternoon in March, Maya got a call from home. Her mother had slipped on the tiled floor and was at the clinic, not serious, but could Maya come? She shut her laptop and grabbed her bag and told Laura and was halfway to the elevator when she saw Adrian standing by the whiteboard, his marker held in midair. He caught her eye. "Go," he said. "Family is a standing meeting." She would tell people later that she didn't know that this was the moment that defined everything, but that would be a lie. She knew. She pressed the elevator button with a finger that felt steadier, because someone in power had named her life as important as the sprint. And when she sat in the clinic and held her mother's hand and listened to the doctor explain the contusion in a soft voice, she thought about how work should be the place you come from, not the place you come to. Months later, Halo held a small celebration at a sari-sari store in Kazan City, where a borrower named Lani had expanded her shop into an adjacent room by luck and negotiation, and 3 small loans. There was pancit on a long table and children running around, their cheeks shining. Adrian made a short speech that made everyone laugh and no one roll their eyes. He handed Maya a small plaque. "Thank you for bringing our to life." Then he whispered to her as he handed it over, "We had the engine. You built the clutch." She laughed and said, "That's the least sexy thing anyone's ever said to me." And he stuck his tongue out like a 5-year-old, then looked at Rafa, now half a head taller, who was explaining to an equally serious child the physics of a spinning top he had bought from a vendor. Adrian bent to him. "You're the original engineer," he said. Rafa considered this with appropriate gravity, then nodded and said, "Do we get cake?" "We always get cake," Adrian said, and they did. And because life is stubborn and uninterested in being a parable, there were days after all that, when nothing worked and the office smelled like frustration, when a tiny change to a form pushed conversions down by 1%, which became a number no one wanted to say out loud. There were days when the app crashed precisely when the team demoed it to a visiting VC. There were nights when Rafa spiked a fever the same week that a release went sideways. There were days when the button was pressed by an agent because the agent himself didn't have money for rice and no one had designed a good answer yet. A hole in the boat that everyone could see but couldn't patch fast enough for the storm that already darkened the water. On one such day, Maya stood at the window in the founder's office, looking down at the city that sprawled like a sleeping animal, overwhelmed and beautiful. And she said to Adrian, "What if we fail at the big thing? What if we are just making prettier ledgers in a world that wants the numbers to break people?" Adrian uncapped his marker. He wrote on the glass below trust and time and the other words that had gathered like small prayers. He wrote, "Love is policy, too." He underlined it once, and then, because he had always been a little earnest, he underlined it again. He capped the marker. "We will fail at some of the big things," he said. "We will succeed at some, too. The point is to build a place where people choose to be brave together. Systems won't save us. People will, but people need systems that don't hurt them while they try." Maya looked at the city and at the reflection of the office lights, ghosted over it like an extra set of stars. She thought of a lobby that once was a gate. She thought of a café where Foam had given her son a mustache. She thought of a word, small and skeptical and curious, like a toddler tipping a bucket to see what's inside. She thought, maybe greatness isn't a single long hallway, but a series of doors you find the courage to open, one by one, even when your hands are full. Years later, after titles had shifted, and the company's logo had been updated in a way that made designers argue at bars and then begrudgingly admit the new kerning was better. After Rafa switched favorite dinosaurs 3 times and then stopped talking about dinosaurs and started talking about electric guitars. After Laura left to run operations at a new startup in Cebu and sent a photo of the water outside her tiny office like the sea were her new whiteboard, there would still be days when Maya had to step into the elevator and remember what it felt like to be told no. When she did, she would message Arlene, and they would meet in the café in a small ritual of gratitude. Arlene would order hot chocolate for Rafa even though he wasn't there, and they would raise their cups as if toasting someone who had opened a door for both of them before either of them knew they would need it. One afternoon, Maya found the old drawing tucked into the back of a kitchen drawer at home, the Apatosaurus with its speech bubble that said "Amen." The paper had softened at the edges. She taped it to the inside of a closet door where she would see it every morning when she chose a shirt. She would touch the paper with the tips of her fingers and think all the ways a life can change because someone refused to let a rule stand in for a decision. All the ways a company can become worthy of the people who show up every day, who choose again and again to make the right thing the easy thing. She would pull on her shirt, smooth the collar, and whisper to herself and to the boy, whose life had been the reason she walked into a lobby and asked for mercy, and to the man who had stepped into that lobby and asked policy to make room for compassion, we are not alone. And when she caught her reflection in the window of the train, surrounded by strangers with their own heavy envelopes and folded dreams, she would smile the way people do who know where they're going, even if the road ahead was full of corners. The city would open for her the way cities do when you have keys. The office would open for her the way work does when it is not a place that asks you to leave parts of yourself at the door. And somewhere in the building, written on a glass wall that cleaned crews somehow never wiped off, "Halo" is where the hard stops would catch the afternoon light, and beneath it, in the slightly messy handwriting of a man who understood that money was just a tool, a ladder if you used it right, there would still be the words he had written years ago, and where ordinary people are allowed to be whole. The next morning began with the smell of rain and the low metallic rattle of the elevated tracks. Maya woke before her alarm and lay staring at the hairline crack in the ceiling that ran like a river toward the window, listening to the city breathe. The drawing of the Apatosaurus hung inside the closet door, the tape holding firm. She dressed quietly, packed Rafa's lunch, and tucked an extra note into the pocket of his backpack because the school had announced a show and tell and he hadn't decided whether he would bring his spinning top or an old transformer missing an arm. She wrote, "The best thing to bring is your brave," and drew a tiny top with motion lines. On the jeepney, she reread the overnight summaries. They had begun using a simple triage label on the back end, small, medium, large, and she scrolled through the small ones quickly, the way a hand learns a piano warm-up. Payment buttons slightly misaligned on low-resolution screens, zip codes not populating for 3 municipalities in northern Samar, users tapping "Learn more" on deferral, but closing the modal immediately. She paused at medium. A field agent reported an older borrower who kept trying to scan her fingerprint but failed 5 times in different lighting. The agent had typed, "She cries when we say passcode," because she forgot the one her son gave and her son moved to Dubai. Maya tagged it human, pinged the auth team about a fallback pattern, and added a note to test a photo-based "I am me" verification flow in areas with intermittent power. At the office, the whiteboards were crowded with handwriting, arrows like trails of birds. Someone had left a small bag of lanzones at her desk with a sticky note, "For wisdom." She bit one open, the translucent segment cool and tart, and smiled. Zach rolled his chair across the aisle like a kid making a break for recess. "You saw the autumn?" he asked. "I did," she said. "Can we test a call and response fallback?" If we record 3 voice passphrases in onboarding, can we compare a short phrase server-side when the fingerprint fails, match the cadence, and let the agent proceed with a second confirmation? Zach scratched the side of his head. We can. We'll need to think about spoofing, but for rural use cases with known agents, the risk is acceptable. I'll put a guardrail on retries and a warning banner in bright language. We're asking this because your fingerprint didn't work. You're safe. Good, she said. And let's make sure the English to Filipino translation doesn't tilt. I don't want safe to become allowed in the wrong context. At stand-up, Laura announced budget approvals for power banks for agents on longer routes, and the room broke into small applause that sounded like rain on tin. Annika shared 2 borrower quotes that made everyone grin, then added one that tightened the air. A borrower had said she felt too stupid to ask for a deferral and had avoided the app for 3 weeks. We have to kill the voice in people's heads that says, "You must be perfect to be helped," Annika said, eyes shining. Adrian slipped into the back of the room halfway through with a paper tray of empanadas. He leaned against the wall, listening. When stand-up ended, he handed the tray to whoever was closest and said, "Thank you for building the kind of place where an apology is an input and not a liability." By lunchtime, the sky had burned to a hard silver, and the heat wafting up from the pavement made the view outside shimmer. Maya ate quickly at her desk while reading an internal doc about rebalancing credit scoring to remove a proxy that unfairly penalized people who moved, some number that had seemed neutral until they listened to stories and found the bias curled up like a sleeping snake. She added a comment, "Can we run an A/B to measure the impact of taking this proxy down by 50%? Then she pinged a small group chat titled, "Kindness, but make it math," where the team had learned to argue about the guts of algorithms without throwing each other's hearts under the bus. In the afternoon, an alert popped. A tropical disturbance had strengthened and might intensify into a severe storm by the weekend. The operations channel lit up with plans. Phones on chargers, messaging templates primed, partner orgs checked for capacity. Maya opened a draft and began typing a push notification for borrowers in projected areas. "We're here. Your loans will not accrue interest during the storm. If you need to adjust a payment, TAP will figure it out together." She stared at the last words and wondered if they were too informal. Then she thought about the woman who cried when the passcode failed and left the words as they were. That evening, she picked up Rafa, and they walked home in the syrupy heat, their shadows long. He told her about show and tell. He had brought the top. "I told them spinning is like choosing," he said confidently, "because it falls if you don't make it spin." Then Carlo said gravity is a bossy friend. "That is both cute and accurate," Maya said, and he beamed. They cooked sinigang with the last of the kangkong. While it simmered, Maya's phone buzzed with a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail, then answered. "Hello?" a woman said, her voice careful. "Is this Miss Ledesma? This is Talia from Riverton Capital. I'm a partner and please don't hang up. We're in diligence on a growth round for Halo. I heard you spearheaded." "I wanted to ask a question about durability." Maya looked at the pot, at the way the fish skin had turned pearly, at Rafa arranging calamansi on the table like green moons. "I don't make decisions about fundraising," she said. "I know," Talia said. "This is informal. You can tell me to call back at work. But my question is simple. Does still work when you scale? Or does it drown you in stories you can't honor?" Maya thought about the cluster dashboard, about the tags that had become whole constellations. She thought about Zach's guardrails and Annika's quotes and Arlene's laminated card at reception. "We built it to warm us, not to drown us," she said. "We keep only what teaches. We return improvements to the people who asked for them. When we can't fix something, we say so to the person who told us. There's a pain in telling the truth, but it is smaller than the pain of silence." On the other end, there was the small sound of a pen tapping. "Thank you," Talia said. "That's better than the deck." After she hung up, Maya tasted the soup and added a dash more patis. Rafa told a long story about a boy in his class who insisted dinosaurs said meep and not roar, and how the class had split into teams, meep and roar, and how they intended to run an experiment during recess wherein they would make both noises and see which one made birds move in the tree. "We are testing, Mama," he said importantly. "That's our brand," she said, kissing his hair, "testing and feeding people." The storm arrived with indecision, a smear of gray days that threatened, retreated, returned with real teeth. On Saturday morning the rain came sideways, needles stripping leaves from the trees. Power flickered. The building generator coughed awake. Maya watched the chat channels bloom with check-ins and trouble calls. Agents posted videos of roads filling, the water rising like something testing a boundary. The message templates they'd prepared went out. Interest paused. Deadlines shifted. Help links live. The call volume doubled, then tripled. The team rotated in waves, coffee hands shaking. Annika posted a script for agents to use on calls with borrowers who were frightened. Start with you. Ask if they are safe where they are. When you say we, mean it. Midday, Adrian called for an all-hands-on video, faces blotched by unstable connections, squares filled with worried eyes, with toddlers clambering into laps, with cats sweeping tails across cameras. He looked tired and steady. "We built the floodgates open," he said. "Let's keep them. The numbers will be ugly for a bit. That's okay. Ugly numbers during a storm are a sign the water is flowing where it should. Take breaks. If your roof is leaking, log off. We'll cover each other. And if you can, when you end a call, remind the person on the other end that needing help is not failure. It's a feature of being human." A message popped from Laura. Government announcement coming. State of calamity in 5 provinces. The legal team updated the deferral rules. Code pushed a quick patch like a sandbag thrown where a wall bowed. The app banner turned red. "Your safety first. We've paused penalties. Tap here if you need a human." The human queue filled. Maya took a block of calls, her voice low and clear, and added tags inside the system with fingers that moved until they trembled. Flooded _rooms, needs _food, can't reach agent, grandma _ill, child _cough, lost _phone. When she hung up, her face was wet, and not only because a drip from the window had found a way inside. Around 3 p.m., the building across from hers lost a chunk of its roof with a sound like a drum drop down the stairwell. She made a quick assessment. Safe, stay away from windows, texted the neighbor group with an update, then saw Newham climb to the top of the dashboard. Borrowers in low-signal areas couldn't get the red banner to load. She pinged Zach, and he deployed a fallback plain text message that could appear on even a 1-bar line. "We'll figure it out together," it still said. "Reply one if you need help." By evening, the rain eased to a steady pour. They ate instant noodles with an egg cracked in, and Rafa, sitting cross-legged on the bed with a book, asked, "Do you think the dinosaurs had storms like this?" "I think they had bigger ones," she said. "Then we're okay," he said with the absolute logic of 5-year-olds, "because we are small and fit inside houses." She laughed, then looked at her phone and saw a message from Arlene. The lobby flooded. "We moved the plants to the mezzanine. Reception moved to the café. Also, someone left biscuits. Adrian says this makes the café a control room." The message included a picture of Arlene standing behind the café counter wearing a borrowed apron, the card reader balanced on a saucer, a line of soggy engineers ordering coffee that would never be charged because nothing that day would be allowed to feel like a transaction. The storm passed by mourning, as storms do, leaving behind a city that looked scrubbed and dazed. The air smelled like wet concrete and diesel and something clean. The statistics later would show their measures, the flattened penalty arcs, the deferral conversions, the set of borrowers who returned sooner, because kindness had not made them complacent. It had made them loyal. But what Maya would remember was the sound in her ear when a woman realized she would not be punished for doing the human thing. It was not exactly a sob or a laugh. It was the sound of a jaw unclenching after days of being clenched, a thrum lower than words. When they returned to the office, the elevator ping sounded somehow gentler. Someone had pinned handwritten thank you notes on a corkboard near the entrance. Another person had added a sign, "We're glad you're here." The glass wall in Adrian's office was full, so he had begun writing across the tops of the windows new sentences that caught in the light and ghosted across the view. Soft landings are still landings. Every is a doorbell. We run on people. Weeks rolled forward. One afternoon, HR forwarded a complaint. A candidate claimed a hiring manager had made a joke about babies in meetings when she asked for the café accommodation. The old world had tugged its head back into the room grinning, wearing a tie. Maya watched frustration move through the workspace like a ripple. Adrian handled it publicly and specifically, met with the manager, wrote a note to the whole company titled, "Jokes that hurt are just hurt," and updated the guide with a line at the top, "We owe people the courtesy of assuming their lives are real." Sometime near the end of that quarter, a board member visited. He walked the floor with the measured smile of someone who knew his photo would end up in a deck. He stopped by Maya's desk and asked, "What if the M button becomes a complaint button? What if we teach people to be weak?" Maya stood and took a breath that went all the way down. "I have not met a weak borrower," she said. "I have met people who take a breath before asking for help, because the world taught them they must hold their breath forever. We are just showing them where the air is." He looked like he might say something sharp. Then he looked at the bread photo on the wall, the one with Lanny's smile, and said nothing. Later, Adrian would send her a 3-word message, "Thank you, Shield," and she would save it. At home, life continued its new rhythm. On Sundays, they cooked ahead and labeled containers like tiny gifts to their future selves. Rafa graduated from tops to a hand-me-down ukulele with a dolphin sticker on the headstock. He strummed it in the mornings, singing nonsense syllables that somehow made more sense than some speeches. Maya's mother's knee healed, and she began a side business selling lumpia to 3 neighboring households, which she ran with a ledger that made Maya smile, because the columns were straight and the numbers neat. But she had taped a small blue sticky at the top that said in looping handwriting, "No interest during storms." One evening, long after the sun had pinned itself under the water and the city had turned to a constellation of little lights, Maya sat on the edge of her bed with the window open. She could hear a basketball game in the court 2 streets over, the thump and squeak, the laughter. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Adrian with a photo attached, a draft of a new mural near the reception sketched in pencil. It showed a door half open, with 100 hands reaching for the knob, not to close it, but to keep it open. Underneath, the words, "We are the door." He wrote, "What do you think?" She typed, then erased, then typed again. "Make the hands different sizes," she wrote, "some small, some old, some with work dirt under the nails, some with bracelets, some with ink. We are the door because all of us keep touching it." The next morning, the office smelled like paint. The mural took shape over a week, each day another layer. The artist worked in long, careful strokes, headphones on, paint speckles dotting her forearms like stars. People brought her snacks, and when she paused to stretch, she would turn and grin, and everyone would feel something in their chest, unclench. When it was done, Arlene took a picture with a Polaroid and taped it next to her laminated card. A small line of people formed for photos. Someone said, "We work in a place with a mural," as if naming it might make it permanent. On a Tuesday that felt like a Thursday, Maya's phone rang. It was Riverton again. "We're in," Talia said simply. "Term sheet signed. I told our committee the thing you told me about pain and silence. I wish I could put that in the risk analysis." "Put it in your heart instead," Maya said, and they both laughed at the earnestness of it, but neither of them would forget. When the announcement went public, the comments still included the old cynicism, some of it earned. Halo was not perfect. It did not pretend to be. But mixed in were other notes. My mother's knee healed because they paused our payments. My sorry store still stands. They answered the phone at midnight, and the person sounded like a cousin. These were not metrics on a chart, but they mapped to something measurable and stubborn, the shape of a community that could survive. On a Friday after numbers and murals and storms, Maya stayed late to finish a document. The office quieted, chairs pushed in, screens dimming, the hum of the AC like a cat purring in the corner. She stood and walked to the glass wall. The markers lay in a neat line like a percussion set. She took the purple one, lifted it, and wrote at the very bottom, where the cleaner's cloth rarely reached, "We choose each other." Then she put the cap back on, clicked it into place, turned off the light, and stepped into the hallway.